John Mertic. I am Director of Program Management here at the Linux Foundation and work with several of our great open source initiatives here, in particular for this conference, ODPI. And in my talk, I'll be talking about some of the investments, the Linux Foundation, some of the projects that we host in the big data, and AI space, which is not only rapidly growing, but also rapidly maturing, and we're seeing some amazing collaborative technologies coming together as a result. So I look forward to speaking with everyone, and I hope you enjoy the talk.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the closing keynote, where we're going to talk a little bit about a new foundation that has been launched within the Linux Foundation called LFAI and Data, and it's the coming together of two great existing communities, and it was just announced a month ago, and we're really delighted by the opportunities that is presenting for the larger AI and data audiences. So as we go to that, let's look at really the overall ecosystem as we think about data. And as we know, open source in data, open source in AI, this is nothing new. And we've had open source in this space since the days of MySQL and other databases. There's been a long-standing history of projects within the Apache Software Foundation and other locations. And certainly we've seen a lot of organizations also bring various open source projects to market around data and AI technologies. But as we sort of look at the overall ecosystem, certainly we see a fair amount of challenges still out there. At the very base level there's a degree of fragmentation and integration and cross-pollination, and we see projects that are spread across different organizations, different project communities, different ecosystems, different locales. You often see things that are very much repeated. You'll see opportunities when projects should come together and they may not be formally coming together. As you sort of go up in the ranks, as even if you're seeing that, there is certainly challenges with governance. And when we say governance here, it's more on how a project works. How do you get involved in it? How do you become a committer or maintainer? How do you help participate in the direction? Oftentimes what we will see is a typical governance is very much in favor of who's created the project, which, in early days of a project makes a ton of sense. But if the aim is this project to grow and to bring a diverse community, which we believe, and I think everyone in open source generally believes, that having a diverse, broad community is the way that you drive a successful open source project, certainly the governance at stake for a number of projects just isn't there. Oftentimes, and this is not necessarily specific to open source AI and data, but we also see some of these tools that are very product centric. They're built around a product, and then maybe this is an open core model or a freemium model, or maybe it's just the scope of it is so tight that it's hard to build that downstream ecosystem. And if you look at some of the great open source projects and maybe some of the highest velocity open source projects out there, starting with the Linux kernel and certainly looking at efforts like Node.js and Kubernetes and others like that, the real aim of how it's gained its success and momentum is not just by the technology itself, but by the downstream ecosystem that is enabled with it. Because as that ecosystem is enabled, all of a sudden, investment starts to happen. People want to get back involved in the project. And that sometimes is often a challenge. Another big thing is just around managing the project assets. And this gets into sort of the legal weeds often, but if you think about it, if you're an organization and you're deciding, hey, this data open source project is one that I want to invest in, it is important to me, I want to invest in this being a part of my future, and it's controlled by one organization that at any time could say, I'm just going to take this and make it closed source, that holds things back. And not even just that, but just there's a lot of gardens that need tended around that as well. Maintaining trademarks, maintaining, all of the legal entity registrations, ensuring that, many of the project community activities are continued to be orchestrated, ensuring that the infrastructure and piece is there. We kind of call this a little bit, and we often call ourselves at Linux Foundation sort of the janitors of open source, but they're really those tasks and those really important things that are often not a first nature activity for many who are building an open source project. They're technologists at heart, but all of these things are really important. These are the things that if that house is in order, people trust these projects. People want to invest in these projects. And with that, when projects are missing pieces of this, there's a glass ceiling that they hit. It's a glass ceiling where, yes, people will use it. Yes, you'll get some contributions. Yes, you'll get some momentum, but you stop at a point. You stop at a point that you can't break through because the project itself does not have that open, transparent, safe haven, and vendor neutrality at its heart to really break through. And, if we think about open source, we know the advantages of it. And I think you all here in this room are very likely involved in open source to one degree or another. And all of these pieces here are things that are really the advantages, from source code access to ability to customize, being able to drive innovation rapidly and through a community, and getting strong peers who are also experts in the space, no matter what organization they work for or what background or what locale they're a part of, and making sure that quality and security and that time to market, and really having a transparent, open discussion around how the technology drives forward, including having a flexible licensing model downstream. These are all things we're very much aware of. And I think these are all things that very much resonate with each of you as you're thinking about open source. But if you think about it around AI and data, there are some really interesting aspects that become very important. And if you look at the concepts of fairness, robustness, explainability, and lineage, those are areas there that having an open approach really, and an open source approach, is a unique value add and a unique benefit to this ecosystem, along with a level of open data, which can be available for projects to be able to leverage, or even, for a larger downstream community. And when you think of fairness of, open methods to detect and mitigate biases, and having that open and having the best researchers involved, the robustness around the data sets and the models, and understanding sort of the adversarial attacks, being able to explain sort of the outcomes of AI, not have that sort of hidden back, but having that very open so participants understand and users understand what it's about. And lineage, which is really a key thing in understanding, where did this data set come from? Where did these toolings come from? Understanding that long picture there. So this is LFAI and data is an umbrella foundation. And we say umbrella here, that means it's a foundation that hosts a number of open source projects within it, but it's under the auspice of the Linux Foundation. And this group here was a formation of two already strong existing communities, one of the LFAI community and one of the ODPI community. And both communities saw that these technologies are so intertwined and so interdependent with one another that bringing them together and having all of these tooling and all of these open source projects and all of these thought leaders together will accelerate open source innovation in this space. And many of you who are in the big data space, you probably remember ODPI from the early days of Hadoop standardization. And over time, it's really made a shift as it's grown into driving data governance and metadata strategies there. And if we look at the lineage of LFAI, which was launched in 2018, it started very strongly. It was actually branded as an LF Deep Learning Foundation. And then after Acumos, which was one of its first projects, came in, and we saw a growth there with Angel and EDL coming through, it transitioned to a broader AI landscape. So this isn't sort of the first time that this foundation has looked to broaden its scope to provide a larger opening and a larger home for a number of these efforts. And if we look here at just many of the sort of the key things that have happened over the last couple of years here, you see a strong number of projects, strong number of community events that have came through that has helped this foundation grow. And if we look at 2020 specifically, this is really where things have shot up. And it's really been interesting in the midst of a pandemic. You would think that it would really hurt open source, but in anything, and this is very true across a lot of our foundations, it's actually accelerated it quite a bit. And we've seen a huge growth in not only the number of projects, but also a driving of a lot of virtual events. And then last month, the coming together of the ODPI and LFAI communities to form its new umbrella, LFAI and data. So the belief in bringing these efforts together is that having all of this under a single roof with a single sort of technical leadership will just enable that natural collaboration to happen more efficiently. And with that, the output will help being unified governance for both sides, for both AI, but also data and analytics on the tools, the interoperability, the standards, the integration, as this use is just going to continue to grow. And being within that same umbrella, that close collaboration can happen. And we've seen that time and time again. I mean, we have a number of these umbrellas that not only focus on horizontal efforts such as cloud, JavaScript, and other technologies such as that, but we also have a number of our foundations that focus on vertical efforts, such as automotive, such as energy, such as the motion picture industry. And what we believe is that as you bring these projects closer together, that helps that collaboration naturally happen. It creates the forums for it to happen, and it creates the opportunity for space of even more defined collaborations between there, along with efficiency, as members see value in all of these organizations worldwide, see value in these projects. There's a singular area where they can invest in, and they know that that can benefit the larger community. And you can see here that this has had a great reception over the entire, not only open source, but I would say even the larger data community of bringing these technologies and bringing these communities together. For one, I think it had really timed very well as where we're at sort of in our move. And as we're starting to see the data-centric approach being much more important, bringing this tightly together has opened up new possibilities and new potential collaborations over time. So the mission of this foundation is very simple: to build and support an open community and a growing ecosystem of open source AI, data analytics projects by accelerating innovation, enabling collaboration, and the creation of new opportunities for all of the members of the community. And as this came together, the motivations that have been seen for driving this as a unified piece really comes down to a couple of key pieces. One is, again, we talked about this, that interoperability, improving it and the capabilities that are hosted across the projects. Two is enabling that closer collaboration and a single technical advisory council. We'll have a slide up here that will kind of dig into how this structure works. That unified governance and then the efficiencies for supporting it. And the net end of this is a strong AI and data ecosystem can be enabled to grow and to flourish and to be well supported also out there in the marketplace. So this slide here kind of gives you a little bit of an idea of how the foundation is governed. And if you're familiar with many of our other Linux Foundation projects, this slide may not be all that shocking to you. It might be very familiar. One thing I always like to point out with how we structure our foundations is we put a very clear delineation between the foundational governance and the technical governance. Both of them are very independent to one another. Neither one side tells the other what to do. Neither one side reports to the other. There is a linkage between both groups with the technical advisory council chairperson that serves as a voting member of the governing board. But the governing board's focus and the foundational governance's focus is to ensure that the funding to support technical projects is there, and that strategy therein is there. So they think of them as a very fiduciary body to make sure that the foundation is not only fiduciary strong, but also has the right strategy and outreach and other infrastructure in place to ensure success for the hosted projects. And within there, there's a number of sub-efforts that happen within there, including legal, strategy, budget, and outreach, which really focuses on helping promote and drive usage, drive participation, drive interest in a number of these projects, whether that would be through content marketing, events, and social and other sort of means as well. On the other side of the house is the technical leadership. And the technical leadership is open to anybody. Anybody can participate in any technical meeting, any technical forum. All of this is transparent and open, and it's done that way by design. Anyone can also rise through the technical leadership by participation in a hosted project and potentially being a chairperson of one of those hosted projects. So if we look at the composition of the Technical Advisory Council, it's a combination of member representation from the LFAI and Data Foundation, but also representation from each of the graduated level projects that are hosted here. And you can see there on the right-hand side, the current list of projects that are hosted here at the foundation. And currently, if you look at that, and working groups for that matter, and if you look at that, we have well over 20 that are hosted here, and they cover a number of different spaces across the AI landscape, data landscape. The Technical Advisory Council's real purpose, again, it's also not a dictatorial body. Each of the projects listed there are autonomous. They set their own IP policy. They set their own operational policy. They determine how they do releases. They determine how they determine who committers are. All the day-to-day operations are self-contained and autonomous with each of these projects. Now, from an overall standpoint, there are guidelines and there are sort of guardrails that the Technical Advisory Council seeks for all their projects, including making sure that they're operating in an open, transparent way and ensuring that the licensing schemes used are under an OSI-approved license. But outside of that, it really doesn't get involved in the matters. It is the Technical Advisory Council is there to make sure that these projects has what they need to be successful. And that could include infrastructure like communication infrastructure, mailing list, Slack channels, things like that. In addition, things like CI and build infrastructure potentially, and also support for other programs such as training, conformance, and other outside bits that will help each of their ecosystems grow. Now, if you look at the boxes underneath here, these are a number of working groups that sit also within the auspice of the Technical Advisory Council. And these working groups are a little bit broader than a code project, but most often these are the coming together of many subject matter and other technical experts in the broader AI and data community, which focus on topics that maybe don't sit into any one project, but maybe are very cross-project functional. And sometimes we see these, they start in a working group and they turn into a project if there's a code output or asset or specific tighter scope that they look to fit in with. But oftentimes these are just great cross-functional, and they're usually used to tackle larger topics in the space. So we have one, for example, Trusted AI, which is basically focus exactly what it says on, trusted AI strategies and technologies and guidance within that space. You see another one there, BI and AI, which is focused on the intersection between business intelligence and analytics tools with the dawn and growth in the AI industry and the impacts on both sides. And that group specifically works yearly on a larger white paper that it produces and showcases out through this project and through the larger community. And it's a big cross-functional effort of a number of different organizations coming together. But really the intent is with that is here's a vendor-neutral place that thought leadership can be driven. And the output is not designed to benefit any one company. It's not designed to help sell products. It's really designed to put vendor-neutral thought leadership out there for the broader good of the community and help be sort of that primary focus of where the topic of this is happening. So here's kind of a larger look at sort of the major efforts that are happening within the foundation and some of the big focal areas that the foundation looks at. And the key one that I always touch on very importantly is that neutral environment. And if anything, that is one of the key pieces that a foundation provides, is that neutrality. no one company, no one organization owns all these bits. If you'd actually look at the code bases and you'd look at the contributors and how these code bases go together, there's no one person that owns all the IP. There's no one person who owns all the code. It's owned individually by the contributors that are bringing the code in there. That is a very that's something that exists in the Linux kernel, for example, and we see that time and time again in a lot of open source projects that really are keen on neutrality as the way that it's driving open collaboration and larger industry adoption. And ensuring that that sits as a non-for-profit neutral entity is the trust that the downstream community has, or the trust given, or the trust provided for that downstream community. We talked a little bit about harmonization and interoperability. The big thing we talked about as one of the challenges in the community is there's a lot of fragmentation. And if we can help bring these efforts together, that helps the overall landscape thrive. And that doesn't mean there's just going to be a forced marriage of projects coming together. I think the community, we see the community decide on what makes the most sense. And in each of these communities understands what makes sense for what they're trying to do. But for any of you who run or lead or are part of an open source project, you know the always the biggest challenge is getting people to help. And if you have 2 fragmented efforts or 3 fragmented efforts, and they're all sort of tackling the same problem, but they're tackling it independently, that's a loss of people that could come together and make the one solution even better. And that's the one thing of when you bring these efforts under a foundation like this, each side is able to see that, these projects are able to see the natural opportunities for interoperability and how these come together. We talked a little about trusted and responsible AI, and this is another huge focus, is to become that home of where that is happening, not only in the technical projects, but also having a high level of principle and guidelines that can be driven. The data half, which is coming in with the ODPI community, is focused on having open source standards and best practices around key topics such as data governance, such as business intelligence and analytics. These are huge emerging areas, and especially for you in the European Union, you can very much resonate with this, as data governance, data privacy are hot topics that are always very key in this locale here. Having data projects that focus in this area to help ensure that companies have ways to be compliant with it, but also that there are key ways for organizations to help harmonize and strategize and have the right tooling to make this successful is a key focus of many of our data projects, one in particular, Egeria, which is a huge focus in space, and also, I believe, had a talk also earlier in this conference. In addition, the idea is also how can we host the open source models and supporting tools, publish best practices, and really from there also is ensuring for all of these projects that they have the funding and outreach and awareness to be successful. And that is always one of the huge challenges for open source, is building that large sustainable future of ensuring that the project has what it needs to be successful, and that can be done over the long term. One of the big challenges we sometimes see in open source is there's a lot of attention, a lot of people paying attention. You see money coming in, and then all of a sudden it goes away. And not that money is the end all and be all here, but there are certain things to help keep the lights on. Who's paying for infrastructure pieces, communication tools, maintaining those. Those are things that are so key for these communities. And one of the things we think about with the open source projects that are not only here, but also the Linux Foundation as a whole, is these are ones that are very critical to our society. These are ones that need to be sustained because there is so much depending on them to drive forward. And foundations like this are a catalyst for making that happen and a catalyst for opening that up. And this is all made possible by an amazing group of members that align and see that larger vision here. And if you look at the names on the screen, you see a combination of not only names that are very familiar to you in the big data world, such as Cloudera and Databricks. Additionally, you see names that are maybe very familiar in the AI and other worlds within there. You see, folks in the data statistics space, such as RStudio. And you also see names just more broadly from industry out there, Orange out there, for example, ING Bank, Nokia, these Huawei, Ericsson. These are folks that are seeing the importance of these technologies and that are integrating them up and down their stack. And having a neutral foundation like this as the host helps them grow it further. So I mentioned the list of projects here, and here's a breakdown of projects between stages. One of the things that this foundation has, and if you're familiar with projects in the Apache world, you're probably familiar with Apache Incubating and active projects, and then the Apache Attic. This is a very similar concept we have here within the LFAI and Data Foundation as well. Where as new projects come in, they typically come in at an incubating level where they're working on getting their governance together, they're getting their infrastructure, they're starting to attract new contributors. And as these projects really start to hit a stride, there's a set criteria that the Technical Advisory Council puts in place to determine if it can move to that graduated status. And graduated status projects are ones that are seeing, a streaming and significant number of commits coming into them. They're seeing a number of adopters and additional users and contributors, and a broad diversity of that happening, and already has a fair and open, transparent governance process in there. And additionally, has achieved a CII, Core Infrastructure Initiative badge, which that is a tool that was also established by another Linux Foundation project called the Core Infrastructure Initiative, which sets a standard for open source projects that if they are structured in the best way, they're able to respond and react to security issues quickly and efficiently. And this sort of gets into not only practices within the development of the community, but practices of how security vulnerabilities are brought in, handled, how issues are handled, and includes, a degree of sustainability within there. I encourage you all to go take a look at the landscape of projects. If you go to l.lfaidata.foundation, you can look at this. And this not only includes these projects, but also includes the broader landscape of open source projects with the AI and data space that we see out there. And that is also an open source project, which we encourage anybody to contribute to. It's a resource we try to make available for the larger community. So for these projects, what does it mean? What does it mean to be here? And talked about a few of these items as we went through here, but I really want to touch on a couple that really stand out. I could always double down and talk more about the neutral home, but I think I've talked everyone to death. But I think having access to program and project management staff and a full-time staff who are able to assist you, oftentimes, and I work with a ton of projects, across this foundation and a number of others, and being able to have expertise on how to drive communities like that, how to have the right infrastructure in place, and just even day-to-day activities of how do we run meetings? How do we, reach out to others? How do we, think about our longer-term strategy as a project? Being able to have experts that have worked across so many of these communities is an invaluable resource, and being in the foundation is a value that each of these projects are able to tap into. In addition, access to marketing and communication services, which is always one of the things that we as technologists are the struggle the most at sometimes, is how do we publicly talk about our projects? How do we get them so that they're picked up on ZDNet and technology platform and technology media platforms? We have a staff that is able to have that reach through our Linux Foundation larger family there, and through a number of the events that we host throughout the year worldwide, that LFAI and our other projects are able to take advantage of. And having that presence there is a way for these projects to naturally be able to grow. In addition, we have in-house legal and a number of also legal services in here, including trademark management, management of contributions, and compliance scans for the code to make sure that your IP pedigree and your IP compliance is top notch. And those are actually very important. They're things that communities don't often think about, but they're the difference between a project being adopted and not in some cases, as if an organization looks at it and the IP is not clear, if the trademark management isn't clear. Those are huge inhibitors for large organizations to be using these code bases. And here's just also a look of just companies out there that are hosting projects here. And again, there's a page that digs into this more, but if you look at this is a great household name. You see cloud providers here. You see, web first companies such as Lyft up there and Uber. You see folks from the motion picture world, DreamWorks up there, and a number of other technology companies as well. And that really showcases a more even broad landscape of the organizations that are participating. And why do they do that? Well, we talked about this, but the Linux Foundation is a leader in this space. Over to date, just to give you an idea here, we host over 400 different projects across 3,400 source code repositories, managing hundreds of trademark registrations and domains. And really, more importantly here, it's a trusted name in these ecosystems here to ensure that a project here is successfully, neutrally managed and for the benefit of the larger community. And there's certainly a huge amount of great staff here that is ready to do that and put the communities first. And I think that's the one thing that we always think about, every staff member here. The most important thing is our communities, and how can we ensure that they are successful, and how can we ensure they have what they need to continue that success. So this LFAI and data, you might have a project that you're working on. Maybe you have something that you've been thinking about bringing into an open source project. Why bring a project to us? Why would having a project hosted here, and why would going through sort of the incubation process be a useful thing? And a lot of these things we touched upon, but I think the biggest thing that really ties all this together is the expertise to get your project from where it is now to being in a large sustainable ecosystem. And what we found is that's a set of collective resources. It's across the board, from events, legal, training, certification, marketing, operations, and security focus. I mean, and these, we talked about it, these are all the things we sort of think about as sort of the janitor work of open source, but they are so important to communities thriving and communities growing. And we are here to ensure that that can be successful. And this is just a look at the outbound effort that we have made for our projects and really engaging a larger community. 37 announcements, and between in 2019 and just in the first half of 2020, 27 announcements alone, and a number of outlets that our community can use to also promote the work that they're doing, including blog, white papers, presentations, and helping also fund to make sure that your website and your other creative work is top-notch and professional, that will attract people coming to it. In addition, we have a number of events that we have globally. One thing at every one of our major LF conferences is an LF AI and Data Summit, which is a great opportunity, in a half of a day to learn more about the AI and data ecosystem and the projects therein. At some of our events, we also will host a specific track, which will have, upwards of 18 to 20 different talks in the main section of these conferences over the multiple days. And we'll also have a booth presence within there, so that which is an opportunity. We have people in our community that actually staff these booths. I mean, we don't staff it really as much from a staff point of view. We want to have our community out there. They're the people in the booths. You can go talk to them. You can go meet these project leaders. You can learn more about these projects directly. And it's a fantastic way to do that. We also globally will host, several different LF, AI, and data days. And these are a combination of in-person, when those get to happen again more frequently, and also virtual. And often they're in conjunction with members that we have globally. And again, it's the same focus of getting larger exposure of the projects and the efforts that are happening within the foundation to specific regions of the world. And we also try to make sure that we're reaching out and getting the word out at different events globally here. And a few here just listed, including this great conference, Big Data Conference Europe, which we're thrilled to be a part of. So we talked a little bit about how a project comes in. The Technical Advisory Council maintains a project lifecycle, and the tool of that is to provide clear guidance on how a project emerges from coming in through incubation, through active status, and then as the project begins to wind down and through emeritus status. And that technical advisory committee is that function that decides which projects are able to come in. That group meets bi-weekly, and it's open to the public. Anybody can join these meetings. There's no secrecy or anything like that. We actually welcome a lot of the public because it's also a great opportunity to learn about some of the projects out there. And there's an opportunity that if a new project, or if you have a new project that you'd want to have considered, you could bring that in. This group meets bi-weekly, as I mentioned, and we've seen a huge influx of interest. So we've often seen that if you're looking to bring your project, or you're looking to bring awareness to your project, probably about a 4 to 6 weeks notice is often required. But that also gives you a time to attend a few of the meetings and get kind of a feel for the audience and understand what it's about. There's a link here on this page here, and it'll be also in the deck materials later, as you can learn how to propose a project for incubation. There's a questionnaire and certain requirements that come together there. And that is sort of the tooling there for bringing a new project in to the foundation. So with that, I want to share here, if you want to be a part of the LFAI and Data Foundation, the community, it's very easy. We have a number of different channels that we're on, including GitHub, Twitter, LinkedIn, YouTube. We have our landscape and we have our blog. All of those are great assets and ways that you can get involved. You can get involved in any of the 20 plus technical projects. All of those are open to anyone. They're all completely open and transparent of how they work and their proceedings. And all of them under OSI compliant licenses, so they're easy to use. And if you have more questions about the event, about LFAI and data, you can email us as well directly, or message us out on Twitter or any of those other channels. So with that, as I'm the close of this event here, I want to thank you all for joining Big Data Conference 2020. I do want to inform you that not only this session, but all of the sessions that have been a part of this event, you'll be receiving those recordings in the following weeks. I hope, on behalf of the conference organizers and the staff that put this amazing event on, that you enjoyed this event. You had a great time during these several past days. You got inspired. You learned about some latest trends that are happening out there. And hopefully all you need now is to be able to put those new learned skills right into action. So I want to say thank you again for joining. I hope in the future we're able to be in person. But in the meantime, I encourage you all to stay healthy, stay safe, and we look forward to seeing you next year. Thank you.